These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
The Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from the Strip and Flip selection, as opposed to election, of 2016, 5 Jim Crows and Electronic Election Theft by Bob Fitrakis and Harvey Wasserman. This is from the chapter Part 1, page 15, Strip. The foundation of election theft is the manipulation of race as a divide and conquer strategy. It began with the first Jim Crow chattel slavery. Slavery in various forms has existed since the dawn of time, but in the colonies of British North America and then in the United States, it took on a uniquely virulent incarnation. Chattel slavery was, of course, a horrific, brutal labor system designed primarily in the American South to power a network of plantations that produced cotton, tobacco, indigo, rice, and other hot weather crops that could be grown in large fields. But it had a larger purpose here. Our peculiar institution, how the founders referred to slavery, was meant to divide black laborers from white in a caste system that would guarantee that they would never unite in rebellion. As we'll see, this originated with the infamous Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 in Virginia, in which indentured servants of both races joined forces. Plantation owners vowed to make sure that that never happened again. When the United States became an independent country, plantation owners also vowed to secure political benefits from their slaves. Thus, they wrote into the Constitution the 3/5 clause that gave slave owners additional representation for their slaves, even though those slaves could not vote. That additional vote count guaranteed that every president from Jefferson to Lincoln either owned slaves or his vice president did, and that the Congress was strongly controlled by slave owners right up to the outbreak of the Civil War. After the Civil War, with formal slavery abolished, a Jim Crow system of racial segregation overtook the South. Enforced by the Democratic Party and its Ku Klux Klan terror wing, white landowners updated the realities of slavery to again keep blacks and whites apart. The roots of racism since 1865 has been the treatment of legally freed African Americans as something less than human, guaranteeing all whites a sense of superiority and an economic leg up. When the populist and socialist movements that campaigned most powerfully from the 1880s to the 1920s worked to overcome this separation, they were hammered by the court and electoral systems through a series of stolen elections and twisted race-based legal decisions, and the fusion of the Democratic and Republican parties in the 1917 municipal races in the Northeast. Confirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1890s, this updated Jim Crow caste system again guaranteed that blacks in the South and parts of the North would not be allowed to vote, and that they would be carefully divided from whites by caste as well as class. Since 1970, the primary weapon for suppressing the minority vote has been the third Jim Crow, the drug war. In the tradition of Bacon's Rebellion and the populist socialist upheavals, blacks and whites once again began to unite during the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1950s and 60s. In response, Richard Nixon's Republican Party invoked the divide and conquer war on drugs. Confronted with the liberalization of the Southern Democratic Party, Nixon feared that black votes might remake America's political map. In Republican eyes, there was only one solution: disenfranchise the African American population, along with young and Latino voters who were leaning strongly to the left. In 1972, Nixon pointedly ignored a powerful report from his own Blue Ribbon Schaefer Commission on drug use and escalated the attack on marijuana and other drugs. In the 45 years since, a staggering 41 million Americans have been arrested for pot or other controlled substances. That's a number of human beings that exceeds the populations of more than 150 other countries worldwide. It has left the United States with the largest prison population in the history of the modern world, while having little or no impact on the actual use of drugs. As Michelle Alexander has shown in her landmark book, The New Jim Crow, the majority of those incarcerated have been black and Latino, with a devastating impact on our elections. Millions of these mostly young, mostly male citizens have been stripped of their right to vote, as well as their ability to maintain families, obtain work, and meaningfully participate in the political lives of their communities. All this has been by design. Once again, a new Jim Crow policy has been delegated by a ruling elite to strip our non-white population of its ability to exercise its fair share of power in our electoral process and to unite with whites in political action. In the 1890s, rising industrial interests committed the nation to a fourth Jim Crow, a course of race-based global empire. The U.S. already had a history of foreign intervention, dating to Thomas Jefferson's 1803 use of our fledgling Navy to fight pirates along the coast, the shores of Tripoli, of what's now called Libya. That was followed by the conquest of the North American continent with genocidal warfare used against the indigenous peoples who had lived here for 20,000 years. By the 1890s, when the frontier consumed, America's giant corporations began to expand overseas. They started with Hawaii, a constitutional monarchy, and then pushed into Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and beyond. And in all cases, these interventions involved the white-ruled U.S. interfering with the political systems of non-white countries. In discussing this fourth Jim Crow, we include an extensive, though not complete, list of these interventions. It underscores the reality that our own political system has become an imperial juggernaut, with the inevitable blowback bound to obliterate any residual pretense to real democracy at home. Generally,
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
and greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. We've got a lot to talk about today. In our third hour, we're going to get into the hidden hand of the U.S. blockade in Cuba. What's going on with that? Leonardo Flores with Code Pink will be with us. In our second hour, I want to get into how France, Macron, I mentioned yesterday on the air that around the time we were on the air, it turned out it was just a little bit after we got off the air, President Macron was going to be giving of France was going to be giving a speech in which he was laying out vaccine passport requirements for that country. I'll give you all the details in the second hour. It's a fascinating story. And also what's going on with the Texas legislators. We're going to get into that in the second hour. You know, what are Democrats going to get their act together to give Americans a right to vote or to establish our right to vote? But we'll get into that in the second hour. I'd like to open the first hour, though, with this question. What are the Republicans up to? Right? I'll tell you what it looks to me like they're up to. And it's conceivable that I'm completely misjudging this. And if you think that I'm wrong on this, you know, or if you think I'm right and I've overlooked something, give me a shout. But it seems to me that what's going on here. Well, let me start. Let me back up a little bit. Dr. Jonathan Reiner, he's a CNN medical analyst. He was on CNN a couple days ago, and he said, a surprising amount of death will occur soon. Now, what he's talking about is the fact that this Delta variant, which is twice as contagious and 2 or 3 times more deadly than the previous variations of COVID, and it's killing 18-year-olds and 25-year-olds and 30-year-olds. I mean, in Missouri, for example, right now, and now in Alabama and Arkansas, hospital ICUs are filling up, and they're filling up not with 70-year-olds. 70-year-olds are all vaccinated. They're filling up with 20 and 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds, and not people who are obese or who are suffering from diabetes or heart disease or asthma or any of the other conditions that might predispose you. These are healthy people. So this is happening right at the same time that right across the spectrum, from Republican elected officials to Republican commentators to Republican-leaning media, from Fox News to OAN to, I mean, just the whole bunch of right-wing hate radio all across the country, right-wing publications. At the same time that all of these Republican-affiliated groups are saying, don't get vaccinated. Why would Republicans and their media be telling their followers not to get vaccinated when 600,000 Americans are already dead from this virus? Millions are already probably permanently, certainly at the moment, disabled because of this virus. About a third of men who get a serious case of it are impotent. I mean, it's like, why would these guys who are, who proclaim their macho masculinity, why would they be telling people not to get vaccinated? I mean, just consider this. Why, for example, why did Trump get vaccinated after he lost the election and after the coup attempt on January 6th failed? Why did he get secretly vaccinated, him and his wife and his son? Why did they secretly get vaccinated in the White House? Why are the Fox News personalities who are discouraging people from getting vaccinated refusing to tell us whether they themselves are vaccinated? Tucker Carlson, and others are to this day, oh no, I'm not going to tell you if I'm vaccinated or not, but you shouldn't get vaccinated. Why would they? Why? Why was one of the biggest applause lines at CPAC, and I quote, the government was hoping that they could sort of sucker 90% of the population into getting vaccinated, and it isn't happening. And there was a huge, this was like standing ovation quality applause at CPAC. Why are Republican legislators around the country pushing laws that would ban private businesses from asking your vaccine status before they decide whether they're going to let you in their place of business or not? They call it banning vaccine passports. For that matter, why have 7 states now put into law, this is Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Indiana, Montana, Oklahoma, and Utah, according to CNN, put into law that their schools can't require vaccines. That would include colleges. Why, when Joe Biden said maybe we should send people, volunteers door to door in low vaccine communities, telling people where they can get vaccinated and when and how? And the right wing goes nuts saying, oh, jackbooted thugs coming to shove something down our throats. Why do half of the members of Congress who are Republicans refuse to say if they're vaccinated? Why does Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, downplay the dangers of COVID, saying, well, we never even closed our state, unlike Ron DeSantis? When South Dakota has 230 COVID deaths per 100,000 people, one of the highest in the country, compared to similar population states, Vermont and Oregon. Vermont has 41 per 100,000. Oregon has 66. South Dakota's 230. Why is this going on? Well, I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping that you can prove to me that I'm wrong. But it looks to me like the only explanation that I can come up with is that they want more people to die. Now, why would they want more people to die? Well, because if they can get the pandemic rolling again here in the United States, it will cause states to shut down. And if states shut down, then the economy goes in the tank. And if the economy goes in the tank, the party in power always loses the next election. It's what happened to Donald Trump. It's why Democrats right now control the House, the Senate, and the White House. The economy went in the tank. I mean, it's like a law of physics. It's like Newton's second law of motion. When the economy goes down, party in power gets kicked out. Yeah, I mean, particularly if the economy goes down substantially. Pat Buchanan
wrote in his newsletter today. He said, are the Democrats headed for their little bighorn with President Joe Biden as Colonel Custard? The wish you suggest is father to the thought. Right. It seems to me like they're not just willing to let tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Americans get sick or die to win the next two elections. They're actively encouraging that outcome. Death is their official electoral strategy. Is there any other possible explanation? I mean, let's consider some of the possible explanations. Number one, they're stupid. Well, no, they're not stupid. Most of these people have college degrees, and Lauren Boebert just got her GED. And even if they were stupid, they're government officials. They have access to medical experts, and they have staff people who know how to use Google. So it's not that they're stupid. Is it possible that they just hate America? I doubt it. I mean, yeah, John Kennedy and Ron Johnson celebrated the 4th of July in Moscow and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think these guys are going to coordinate with a foreign power to kill Americans, even if most of the foreign trolls are promoting vaccine freakouts. Is it that there's this bizarre faux masculinity, that Trump was promoting, saying, masks are something wimps wear? When he was making fun of Joe Biden. Oh, Joe Biden, he wears 2 masks. I don't know. I don't think people are taking masculinity cues, from an obese geriatric guy with the nation's biggest comb over, who wears absurd amounts of makeup, male diapers, and false teeth. I mean, what's masculine about slowly drowning in your own snot? What's masculine about not being able to get an erection because you had COVID? I don't think it's masculinity. I don't think it's a fear of the vaccine itself. As CNN medical analyst Reiner said, quote, over 100 members of Congress, all of them GOP members, refuse to tell their constituents whether they've been vaccinated. They have all been vaccinated. Every single one of these characters have been vaccinated, end quote. It has nothing to do with conservative ideology. You got conservatives like Bill Kristol and George W. Bush out there proudly proclaiming their vaccine status. Reagan oversaw, requiring vaccines in California schools when he was governor. So it's not that. It's not that they're being paid by Big Pharma to trash vaccines. I mean, there's no money in this for them. Nobody's going to make money off not selling vaccines. So what's left? I mean, that's every possible reason that I could think of for why Republicans would encourage people not to get vaccinated in the face of a deadly disease. Which leaves me nothing other than the possibility or the probability or maybe even the certainty that Republicans are doing this because they want more people to die, because they think that'll hurt the economy. And if the economy goes in the tank, then they will win the next election. I dare you to talk me off the ledge on this thing. I can't see any other possible explanation. And I realize this is like strong language, right? The headline over at HartmanReport.com today is death is their election strategy. I probably should have put a question mark at the end of it. But what else could it be? I mean, is it that they love death? I don't think so. They're all afraid of dying, just like everybody else. That's why they're secretly vaccinated.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So what do you think is going on here? And I want to get into Republican morality right after the break, too. Stick around. And welcome back. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
I could check off just about all of the above that you were mentioning as reasons, but the economy is number one. It's going really well. If the infrastructure bill passes, it's even going to be going better.
Oh, it's going to explode.
If the some sort of voter rights act passes ditto, people are going to be more inclined to vote for Democrats if they're independents. So the Republicans are going to try to do everything they can to screw things up. January 6th is a good example. They were trying to stop the certification of the election.
Right.
Trump is running around now having rallies, and he's proclaiming that he still won. And this is like a full frontal attack on democracy by I call them the Republican Party, and I spell it with 3 capital Ks. They're cons. They're con jobs, and they're Ku Klux Klan. They don't want us voting. So if they can kill a number of people who might be Democrats, that's a plus for them.
I don't think they care whether it's Democrats or Republicans. The one area where I think they might have some consideration, if you go back and, I've written several op-eds about this now. You go back to April 7th of last year, right? A year and 3 months ago. April 7th was the day that all of the major newspapers reported this blockbuster study that found that black people were more likely to die from COVID than white people. And of course,
exactly.
And that was the week that the Trump administration stopped all efforts to contain or constrain this virus and tried to open the country back up rather than shutting the country down. It was literally that week where Rush Limbaugh suddenly goes, oh, there's a racial component to this. I mean, I've got links to the actual quotes from Limbaugh in my articles on that, that you can easily find on that. And he's going, oh, there's a racial component to this. Well, maybe we need to reconsider this. They have got no problem promoting the death of black people. I mean, that certainly, a year ago, I think that was conspicuous, and I'm astonished that the media has done such a terrible job of reporting on that, because the evidence is just laying right there on the ground. Anybody can pick it up and look at it. But outside of that, I don't think they care. I don't think they care who dies, Dennis.
Sort of following on what you just said, I heard an NPR report yesterday that only half of the Hispanic Americans and Native Americans in Arizona have been vaccinated. The Native American community there, it's very remote, very places in Arizona that are far away from health centers. Yeah. And with the Hispanic community, it's not just, it's not Mexicans, people with Mexican backgrounds. It's El Salvadoran, Guatemalan, and so on. And they have their radio stations, but those radio stations haven't really been telling people to get vaccinated. So now there's going to be a push to do that.
No, you got right-wing radio stations telling them the opposite. They're
exactly.
In Spanish. They're singing the same song. Mm-hmm. These vaccines are going to alter your DNA, which is a lie,
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. So, but, that's one state. Missouri, though, I mean, that's a red taker state.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I'm with you. Dennis, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann program. Telling the truth, the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. And apparently the Republicans, too. Stick around. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at TomHartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have over at HartmannReport.com my daily rant, basically my op-ed for the day. You can find that there. Advertising free and all that sort of thing. And over at TomHartmann.com, you can sign up for our newsletter where Sue compiles literally links to every story that I talk about throughout the program, throughout the day. Along with clips of the show and things like that. But we also have a special weekly clip for people who are signed up over at TomHartmann.com, supporters of the program. And the one this week is the story of 2 Republican legislators in Florida. One who in 2008 got a law passed that would have prevented the condo from collapsing that went down, a few weeks ago. And the other, a guy who came along 2 years later in 2010 and repealed that law. And he turns out to be a home builder. What a surprise. And maybe a condo developer. Yeah, you can check it all out at TomHartmann.com. So the possibility that the Republican 2022 election strategy is grounded in killing a lot of people, or, letting the virus kill a lot of people, raises a secondary question, which I also present to you, which is, what is Republican morality? There's a new book out. In fact, it's coming out this week. It's not, the Guardian got a hold of a copy of it. It's called Perversion of Justice, and it's going to be published, actually next week. And in this book, they lay out how Ken Starr, remember Ken Starr? Ken Starr, back in the late 1990s, Ken Starr was the guy that Newt Gingrich hired to put in charge, the special prosecutor or whatever his title was, the independent counsel. It was one or the other. They changed from decade to decade. But basically, he was the guy who did the investigation of Bill Clinton that led to Monica Lewinsky. He published this Starr report with all these salacious details. I mean, literally blow by blow, no pun intended, details of Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky's sex life. What they did, where they did it, how they did it, what position they did it in. I mean, they didn't actually do it, but they did a lot of pre-it. So I don't even want to go there. Anyway, Ken Starr was the guy who just drenched our nation in the late 90s with this salacious BS because he was just so indignant that Bill Clinton was having an affair with a 22-year-old, a young intern. How dare he? Well, it turns out, according to this new book, Perversion of Justice by Julie K. Brown, Ken Starr was the guy who got Jeffrey Epstein off and used some serious political muscle to make it happen in Washington, D.C. He had Jeffrey Epstein off on his charges of not just having sex with 14-year-olds, but selling them, trafficking them, handing them off to his friends. That's your Ken Starr. Yep, sure enough. This book is going to be really interesting. Another guy who was involved with this, by the way, the top federal prosecutor in Miami back in 2008 when Ken Starr helped Jeffrey Epstein get a sweetheart deal. The guy who was the prosecutor who cut that deal, his name was Alex Acosta. If that name sounds familiar to you, it's because Alex Acosta was in Trump's cabinet. He was our Secretary of Labor. Seriously. So what is Republican morality? Well, I get it that they don't want women to be able to get abortions. Okay. And, if you don't want women having abortions, it seems to me like what you would do is help women avoid getting pregnant. I mean, doesn't that seem logical to you? And yet you literally have some of the same Republican legislators who want to outlaw abortion, also trying to outlaw birth control. This is not about not wanting abortions. If they didn't want abortions, they would raise the economic and educational status and opportunities of women in the United States, and they would, make birth control more widely available and sex education in our schools. But they oppose all of those things. This is about, that morality is about controlling women. What else is Republican morality? I'm kind of at a loss, frankly. It seems like, their morality has to do with, we're going to get tough on crime. We support the police. Until the police try to stop you from staging a coup d'etat against the United States government on January 6th, then they hate the police. Really?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I think there's actually even a larger kind of umbrella issue here, which is, what do these people believe? Or is it really just all about money and power?
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then-Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmanReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmanReport.com. So the Republican Party has sold themselves way back, all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, and in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at TomHartman.com.
Welcome back. Okay, so here we have in Missouri, the 7-day average of new cases. This was published today. This is the latest. The 7-day average of new cases is nearly 1,400 new positive cases each day, up more than 150% from a month ago. In Arkansas, that number is up 287%. Caseloads and hospitalization rates in the Ozarks region have reached levels not seen since the winter, officials say. In several counties across Missouri and Arkansas, caseloads have now reached or surpassed their winter peaks. The Delta variant is now accounting for 73% of new cases in Missouri, which is the highest of any state. And the hospitals are starting to buckle. This fellow, Mr. Cox, I forget his first name, has been tweeting. He's the head of one of the big hospitals in Missouri, and he's been tweeting about, oh my God, we've got to do something. Why are Republicans promoting more death and disease? Am I missing something here? I think it's pretty straightforward, but, it's possible I'm missing something. Susan in Decatur, Georgia. Hey, Susan, what do you think?
Hey, Tom, I think that I've been listening to you long enough to know that this country was founded on racism. This country benefits from racism. Rich people benefit from racism. And the GQP and Trumpism is white supremacy. The FBI says the biggest threat is white supremacy. I've had a white supremacist tell me that they don't want universal health care because they, like you have said before, they don't want black people to have it.
Yeah.
The reason that they do not want to press on the vaccines is because they have the same information, Tom, that you and I have. The April 7th letter that says COVID infects and kills more brown and black people than anybody else. And the previous gentleman's comment about the Hispanic community and the vaccination thing is what I called you about in the very beginning of COVID. And I expressed to you that my family is Mexican, that they all listen to Spanish radio and Spanish news, which is here in Atlanta owned by Fox News and Univision. And the right-wing Spanish radio stations did not say anything about COVID and what was going on until Thursday. When the government released it on Monday, it was not translated into Spanish until Thursday. So that 4-day window, now all the Hispanic people of my family, they truly believe in a partiality of the QAnon conspiracies regarding the vaccine.
Oh, my God.
So less than half of my family that can and are eligible to get vaccinated are vaccinated. I'm scared to death.
Yeah.
I have a 9-year-old that cannot get vaccinated, and I'm scared to death for him.
Oh yeah, we've got grandchildren, and my children are, it's like, what do you do when you got a kid who can't get vaccinated, and you would like to go to a restaurant, or you would like the kid to go to school or daycare, but
it's not fair that I have a 14-year-old that's already been vaccinated. He can go to the mall with his cousins that are not vaccinated. The entire mall here in Georgia, no one wears a mask, including the cousins. So my 9-year-old wants to go to the mall. I can't let him go.
Yeah.
I can't, in good faith, in good parenting, let him go.
Well, hopefully that's going to get fixed in the next few weeks. The studies on people under 16, I think it is, or 14, whatever the age
Under
is.
12, yeah. I've got him
12?
signed up for a vaccine trial.
Yeah, because those trials are supposed to be, rolling over sometime in the middle of this summer. I don't recall the date that they were talking about, but I think it was July or August. So hopefully that'll get cleaned up soon. Because a lot of people, and this also has to do with why some people are not wanting to come back into the workforce, because they don't want to stick their kids in daycare where the kids will be exposed to COVID and bring it home. And even vaccinated people can still get it. I mean, it's not as bad. It's not going to kill you in all probability, but hey, it's no fun to get this disease. It's a terrible, terrible disease. And you don't want to be spreading it to other people who may be in your family or your neighborhood who may not be able to get immunity because they're immune compromised, because they're on drugs for arthritis or plaque psoriasis, or they've had a transplant of some kind. They're on immunosuppressive drugs and the vaccines don't produce immunity in them. There are these, and the GOP just doesn't seem to care about any of this. It's just like, let's crash the economy. It's just
because white supremacy is more powerful than money.
It really is. They're the same thing. White supremacy. It's not just about ideology or weird theories of evolution. It's about who's in charge, who's got the cash, who's got the power that comes with that cash.
Who's got control, who has control over what we want and say.
Exactly. Susan, brilliant. I've got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. Mark in Chicago. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, Tom. It's interesting that I'm following up that last, your caller. Let me ask you, Tom, okay, and please don't interrupt me. Our government has already shown that they will go after their people that they politically disagree with, meaning the IRS. Okay? You had Kamala Harris back in October saying that if Trump was going to administer the vaccination, she would not take it. Tom, when you were being called a white supremacist, a racist, a homophobe, why on earth would I now trust the government that is calling me every caustic name in the book? Because
Mark, the government is not calling you anything. I'm calling you a white supremacist and a racist, but the government is not.
Tom, yes, they are.
No.
Tom,
when Kamala Harris, that was during a campaign. Come on, you're taking one sentence completely out of context, trying to blow it up, mispronouncing her name, which is, one of the little racist tricks that they do on right-wing hate radio. And I'm over it, Mark. Thanks a lot, but see you later. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, way to go. By the way, your rant about Ken Starr, don't forget he had to resign from Baylor College because he was suppressing a sex scandal there, or rape by football players.
Yep.
Anyway, so the U.S. is an exceptional nation, and it's exceptional in that it has a history of slavery that is unique because, unlike other places that have had slavery, American slavers suppressed education. They prevented the slaves from reading and writing and dancing and singing and practicing their religion. It was uniquely cruel. And putting out disinformation about vaccines, in my mind, is just an extension of what they've always done. It's just part of the same big bag. It's a very limited repertoire that they have. And
you think it's about keeping people
American
ignorant?
Tradition to.
You think rather than as an election strategy, are you suggesting here, Jonathan, that what the Republicans are actually doing is basically trying to promote anti-science ideology to keep people stupid or cause them to distrust science? So, for example, maybe they will go along with the idea that there's no such thing as global warming and the petro-billionaires can continue to make their money?
They've done that since the founding of the country. Of course, that's what they're doing. Right. And frankly, I have a very simple solution to vaccination. And it's not having people signed up for lotteries or thinking of clever gimmicks. Just offer people Medicare for everyone who wants to get a vaccination. Say, hey, we're going to give you health insurance. And if you look at Canada, right, Canada has a third of our deaths per 100,000. We have the same death rate as Mexico. That's crazy. And so much for the wall, right? But and the thing people don't understand about Canada is that they think it's like our system of Medicare. It's actually not. It's actually 13 provincial and territorial health care insurance plans under a federal umbrella. Right. But they're actually, in a lot of ways, a private, varied system. It's not one giant system.
Yeah. No, there are different benefits from province to province.
I would offer people health care. And
but I think your point, Jonathan, of offering people health care if they get COVID, what's actually happening is the reverse. And I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop with regard to private for-profit health insurance companies who are going to, at some point, start saying, you got COVID because you weren't vaccinated, and therefore this $45,000 hospital bill or this $450,000 ICU hospital bill, we are not going to pay. And that shoe is going to drop any day now. It's going to be ugly when it does. It's going to be very, very ugly. Thanks a lot for the call, Jonathan. Mary in Seattle. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just had a comment on the vaccine, and I'm looking at some of the people who don't like the vaccine and are also Republicans, some of them, or follow Trump. I don't think they're necessarily Republican or anything. They just like Trump. Now, we talked about how some of the people that follow Trump were uneducated, and not meaning they're dumb or not putting them down. It just means some of them didn't have higher education and didn't have a lot of tools to bring to the table when they're making these decisions. And if you think about it, Trump, he went to college. I don't know if they know that. Yeah. But he didn't get any help. He's uneducated. I mean, he talks uneducated. He acts like a buffoon. So that kind of resonates with people. So if you're uneducated and you don't trust the medical system, or if some of the Christians, let's say the evangelicals and all the Christians, and so many that follow him, one of the reasons is they don't believe in doctors and healing, some of them, not all, but a lot of major religions, they believe in prayer, and I do too, and healing. But they need to look into the Bible and see where the Lord said that Luke, that wrote the chapters in the Bible, was a physician, and that Paul let Luke come in and treat him, and he was going to Luke for treatment as a doctor. And I think it's Proverbs or somewhere it said, take the medicine, even though it's bitter, it will help you. Now, I think that's Proverbs, but I'm saying the Bible is not anti-medicine. Now, you remember, wasn't it Genesis where they had the plague when they had all the meat? You remember they didn't want the manna. They're like, give us some meat, and they were rioting. We want some meat.
But
Well, anyway, they were given manna, which is food from heaven that would come at night. It would come, and you wake up in the morning like dew. Heavenly food. Who would complain about that? But they had major riots. We want some meat. So God, remember, he sent in a flock of birds, and they were able to eat that. And then disease broke out, and they were dying and sick. So what God did, he told the prophets to take a brass snake and put it on a pole and walk around as people looked at it. And right now, the symbol for the American Medical Association is a snake on a pole, and people don't understand where they got that from.
Yeah, you're
Healing
right.
in the Bible.
So, Mary, we're hitting a break here. Are you suggesting that they're not, that the Republicans are encouraging people not to get vaccinated because they think they're religious rather than because they think it'll help them in the next election?
I think they think it'll help them in the election, but they're also, bidding on the fact that people are uneducated and people in the Bible or some of the Christians don't believe in healing. But they're not just the people of color, it's old.
I get it. Mary, thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 48 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls right after this. What is Republican morality? What is their strategy? Why are they telling people not to get vaccinated? And welcome back. Earl in Hyde Park, Illinois. Hey, Earl, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, buddy. How you doing, Tom? I've listened for a number of years, and thank you for taking my call. I want to try to give you a visualization. In the karate movies, they have a karate chop. And if you look at your hand and you try to form it into a mechanism that can chop, make a chop blow, the middle finger is the longest one, which I would say will represent money and power, and I use them both synonymously. Then your other fingers on either side of that would go to like fear of the government. You know, they've always preached that big government is creeping into your lives, creeping into your bedrooms. And so they have convinced a lot of their voters that big government is something to fear. Some of these things that you have been talking about today, I should say this morning, are very apropos, and I don't disagree with any of it. But for generations now that I've been following politics, they have always represented to their base that beware of the intellectual elite. They look down upon our voters.
Yeah.
You know,
Reagan used to talk about the pointy-headed intellectuals.
Right. And so all of the things that what I'm trying to say is not just one thing, but I think the main thing is there's no morality there. There's no morality. The main driving force behind the Republican Party is just power and accumulating more money and everything else.
Well, and Earl, you're saying basically that yes, they are trying to win an election by crashing the economy, but they're also using this "be afraid of big government" thing as a piece of this. And I think you're probably right, and it's important for people to realize that the whole "be afraid of big government" thing was started back in the 50s with the Foundation for Educational or Economic Education and some of these other right-wing think tanks that were just starting to emerge, in the 50s and 60s, and then exploded in the 70s after the Powell memo. And basically, they were all being funded by trust fund babies and other billionaires and right-wing foundations as a way of saying government shouldn't be regulating our corporations and it shouldn't be taxing us rich people. And that was the core message. And so, but they, at that point in time, only rich people could resonate with that message. So they had to make it palatable to the masses. And so what they said was, when government tries to regulate my business, that's the same thing as trying to regulate you. And, trying to regulate tobacco. That was where the original Tea Party started. It was literally incorporated in the 80s. Yeah.
Don't forget big oil. Now, let me say one more thing, and don't forget another thing about this is the industrial prison complex, where they generate, number one, free labor, and number two, they take black people out of the voting system. So it's you get more bang for the bucks. With,
how do they take black people out of the voting system?
Well, if you're in jail, you can't vote. They take away your right to vote.
You're talking the prison industrial. I got it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I missed that. Yeah.
All right, sir. Thank you for taking my call, buddy.
Sure enough. Thanks a lot, Earl. Good to hear from you. Let's see. How much time do I have? Oh, I've got 2 seconds. Not enough time to take another call. We'll be right back in 1 minute after I read a little commercial message over on the other side of the show. And I will be back picking up your phone calls. So stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. Right back after this. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So over at ThomHartmann.com, we just put up a new video for our supporters, the people who support our program, that talks about Malcolm X saying, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are oppressed and loving the people who are the oppressors. He said that 55 years ago to, this month, February, in 1965. And, what that actually means, how that warning from Malcolm X was apparently taken to heart by the Republican Party in 1981 through the Reagan presidency. And we actually saw this shift in America to the point where, that led to everything. Stop and frisk and the demonization of homeless people and the demonization of poor people and black people and Muslim people and all of this stuff came out of this very specific kind of strategy in the 1980s. So you can find it over at ThomHartmann.com and check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and what a topic! We're trying to figure out, what's going on. I mean, Stephen in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Stephen, you're on the air. What's up?
Hey, Tom, if we use messaging a little bit more powerfully in the Democratic Party, I think it could be to our advantage. Just like I have friends I talk politics with that are, all right-wing types, and anytime we get into discussions, I always say, all of those people living in the poor red states, and then right away they go crazy. Right then, you already got them on the edge. Then you can go a little further. If we're talking about the economy, I could say, well, all the Republican right-to-work states, they don't pay much, not even as much as Walmart, and then that'll make them crazy. So why not use this? All of the people dying in America are pretty much all in the Republican states.
That's what's happening right now, and you've got Republican. I mean, Kristi Noem, the Republican governor of South Dakota, at CPAC was bragging about the fact that she didn't shut down her state. She has 230 deaths per 100,000 people in South Dakota. Here in Oregon, it's 66 deaths per 100,000 people. In Vermont, it's 43 deaths per 100,000 people. She has 230 people who have died for every 100,000 citizens of South Dakota, and she's bragging about this?
Yeah, I really think Biden needs to start doing some fireside chats like FDR and talk about these issues, because we're not getting through to the Fox News people and Newsmax and Hate Radio. I have friends now that are so devoted to all of that programming out there that's very negative and hateful that you can't get a word out edgewise before they just freak out. Oh, no, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it.
I know. Just and a heads up, by the way, speaking of Biden speaking, right after, literally 5 minutes after we get off the air today, President Biden will be on the air talking about voting rights. And now we've got these Texas legislators who have fled to Washington, D.C. They are there to lobby our legislators to pass voting rights legislation. The only way voting rights legislation can be passed is by either drilling a hole in the filibuster, what we talked about yesterday, or blowing up the filibuster, or somehow modifying it. And
he needs to tell people the reason we can't get anything done, we have ideas, but Mitch McConnell and the Senate won't let us do them.
Right. And I think that he needs to openly, it'll be, I'm looking forward to this speech. Like I said, he will start it right after our show gets off the air at the end of the third hour of our program, 2 more hours from now. And
thanks, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. I am hoping that he just, brings a 2x4 with a nail on the end of it. It's just, we'll see. We'll see. Anyhow, Macron says passports. Tell you about that after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
The Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from the Strip and Flip Selection, as opposed to Election, of 2016, 5 Jim Crows and Electronic Election Theft by Bob Fitrakis and Harvey Wasserman. This is from the chapter Part 1, page 15, Strip. The foundation of election theft is the manipulation of race as a divide and conquer strategy. It began with the first Jim Crow chattel slavery. Slavery in various forms has existed since the dawn of time, but in the colonies of British North America and then in the United States, it took on a uniquely virulent incarnation. Chattel slavery was, of course, a horrific, brutal labor system designed primarily in the American South to power a network of plantations that produced cotton, tobacco, indigo, rice, and other hot weather crops that could be grown in large fields. But it had a larger purpose here. Our peculiar institution, how the founders referred to slavery, was meant to divide black laborers from white in a caste system that would guarantee that they would never unite in rebellion. As we'll see, this originated with the infamous Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 in Virginia, in which indentured servants of both races joined forces. Plantation owners vowed to make sure that that never happened again. When the United States became an independent country, plantation owners also vowed to secure political benefits from their slaves. Thus, they wrote into the Constitution the 3/5 clause that gave slave owners additional representation for their slaves, even though those slaves could not vote. That additional vote count guaranteed that every president from Jefferson to Lincoln either owned slaves or his vice president did, and that the Congress was strongly controlled by slave owners right up to the outbreak of the Civil War. After the Civil War, with formal slavery abolished, a Jim Crow system of racial segregation overtook the South. Enforced by the Democratic Party and its Ku Klux Klan terror wing, white landowners updated the realities of slavery to again keep blacks and whites apart. The roots of racism since 1865 has been the treatment of legally freed African Americans as something less than human, guaranteeing all whites a sense of superiority and an economic leg up. When the populist and socialist movements that campaigned most powerfully from the 1880s to the 1920s worked to overcome this separation, they were hammered by the court and electoral systems through a series of stolen elections and twisted race-based legal decisions, and the fusion of the Democratic and Republican parties in the 1917 municipal races in the Northeast. Confirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1890s, this updated Jim Crow caste system again guaranteed that blacks in the South and parts of the North would not be allowed to vote, and that they would be carefully divided from whites by caste as well as class. Since 1970, the primary weapon for suppressing the minority vote has been the third Jim Crow, the drug war. In the tradition of Bacon's Rebellion and the populist socialist upheavals, blacks and whites once again began to unite during the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1950s and 60s. In response, Richard Nixon's Republican Party invoked the divide-and-conquer war on drugs. Confronted with the liberalization of the Southern Democratic Party, Nixon feared that black votes might remake America's political map. In Republican eyes, there was only one solution: disenfranchise the African American population, along with young and Latino voters who were leaning strongly to the left. In 1972, Nixon pointedly ignored a powerful report from his own Blue Ribbon Schaefer Commission on drug use and escalated the attack on marijuana and other drugs. In the 45 years since, a staggering 41 million Americans have been arrested for pot or other controlled substances. That's a number of human beings that exceeds the populations of more than 150 other countries worldwide. It has left the United States with the largest prison population in the history of the modern world, while having little or no impact on the actual use of drugs. As Michelle Alexander has shown in her landmark book, The New Jim Crow, the majority of those incarcerated have been black and Latino, with a devastating impact on our elections. Millions of these mostly young, mostly male citizens have been stripped of their right to vote, as well as their ability to maintain families, obtain work, and meaningfully participate in the political lives of their communities. All this has been by design. Once again, a new Jim Crow policy has been delegated by a ruling elite to strip our non-white population of its ability to exercise its fair share of power in our electoral process and to unite with whites in political action. In the 1890s, rising industrial interests committed the nation to a fourth Jim Crow, a course of race-based global empire. The U.S. already had a history of foreign intervention, dating to Thomas Jefferson's 1803 use of our fledgling Navy to fight pirates along the coast, the shores of Tripoli, of what's now called Libya. That was followed by the conquest of the North American continent with genocidal warfare used against the indigenous peoples who had lived here for 20,000 years. By the 1890s, when the frontier consumed, America's giant corporations began to expand overseas. They started with Hawaii, a constitutional monarchy, and then pushed into Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and beyond. And in all cases, these interventions involved the white-ruled U.S. interfering with the political systems of non-white countries. In discussing this fourth Jim Crow, we include an extensive, though not complete, list of these interventions. It underscores the reality that our own political system has become an imperial juggernaut, with the inevitable blowback bound to obliterate any residual pretense to real democracy at home. Generally, there's been an attempt to portray these interventions as benign, meant to bring democracy, progress, and the Christian faith to third world nations. In fact, they've been largely economic in purpose, a dollar democracy to grab other people's resources. The Strip and Flip selection of 2016 by Bob Fitrakis and Harvey Wasserman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, as Republicans and GOP media are encouraging Americans not to get vaccinated and just go out there and die for your party, right? Something very different just happened in France. And I mentioned yesterday that I thought this was going to happen. And after I got off the air, sure enough, it did happen. And that is that the French president, Emmanuel Macron, announced new health rules. Now, France right now is hosting the Cannes Film Festival. And it was one of the first, major events in Europe where, well, maybe in France, where they absolutely required proof of vaccination to get in. But Cannes is like one of those things where if you're going to Cannes, you're rich to begin with, in all probability. I mean, unless you're one of the poor filmmakers. It's like, a lot of the people who go to Cannes are, it's like you come flying on your private jet. Of course they're vaccinated. And they're not idiots. They're not Republicans. But yesterday he extended that. Now the European Union has come up with what they refer to as the digital COVID certificate. And, pops up on your smartphone, and you can get it two ways. One, you can get it by being vaccinated. Two, you can get it by having a negative COVID test, but then it expires after a week or two. But it'll get you into an event. It'll get you into a restaurant. It'll get you into, whatever you want to, into con. If you've been tested negative within the previous, I frankly don't know the period of time. I know it's a matter of weeks before the certificate expires. But what Macron announced yesterday was that you may not go into any cultural venues like museums, theaters, movie theaters, concert halls. You may not go into any of those places starting July 21st without your digital certificate, your vaccine passport. And starting on August 1st, in, 2 weeks, you have to have this pass in order to get into a restaurant, a cafe, a coffee shop, a retail store, on a train, on a plane, or basically in any kind of public place that is regulated by the government, where the government has any say in their ability to interact with the public, which is pretty much all of them. You get this QR code. And so the question that I guess this is kind of a follow-on to the first hour where I'm asking, is it possible that what I'm asserting, that the Republican Party actually has decided that letting more people die will work to their advantage, because if a lot of people start dying and filling up hospitals, the economy will slow down. If the economy slows down, that hurts the party in power. The party right now that holds the White House, the Senate, and the House is the Democratic Party, and therefore it'll hurt the Democratic Party and Republicans will get elected. So that, that was my premise of last hour. I think it dovetails nicely with this question of why can't we do what France is doing? The EU digital passport is not rocket science. You've got, similar things have been rolled out in New York and California already. I think in New York they call it the Empire Pass. It's the Empire State. So, and multiple states are working on this. You've got Clear, the company. If you've traveled through an airport in the last couple of years, you've probably noticed these little Clear stations where you go up and you just put your fingerprint, a handprint basically on their machine. And it recognizes you, and it takes your picture and recognizes you, and boom, you jump the entire line. Go right straight onto the plane, or into the gate area, or into the terminal area to head to the plane. So Clear is coming out, and they've now gone private or public, by the way. This company just went public a month or so ago. They're coming out with a digital vaccine passport, essentially. It's not like we lack the technology. It's not like we're not smart enough to do it. It's not like our companies can't do it. Microsoft said that they were going to roll one out months ago. I'm not sure if they ever did. I think maybe they got, when the Republican Party decided to make it political, they kind of backed off. As I said in the last hour, you've got 6 or 7 states now that have made it illegal to require vaccine passports in public schools, and 23 states that have legislation pending, 12 of them it's passed, to make it illegal for stores to require a vaccine passport to get in. Good luck enforcing that, right? This is, because it's simply an extension of no shirt, no shoes, no service. We reserve the right to refuse service to anybody based on whether they have the possibility or probability of spreading a deadly disease. But here we are. So there's that. This is happening in Europe. They're getting their act together. They're saying, okay, enough. We don't want any more people to die. Here in the United States, the Biden administration is doing their best. They vaccinated, we finally hit that 70% target of people over 18. But that's still only about 50, I think of around 53, 54% of Americans are now, vaccinated or have their first shot. Fully vaccinated, we're below 50%, if my memory is correct. We're floating in that territory. We still have a long way to go. And what is slowing it down? What is blocking this? What is preventing people like Louise and I from showing up in a local restaurant? It's that I don't know that the guy sitting next to me without a mask isn't some mask hole, some Trumplican who just got infected with COVID and is in his most contagious state but doesn't yet realize he's sick. He may just have a little tickle in the back of his throat for a day or two. until he ends up in the ICU. And he's breathing all over me, or breathing upwind of me. I really think vaccine passports are absolutely necessary if we're going to put our economy back together. And that we have to vaccinate more Americans. This is very straightforward stuff. So there's that. Then we also have now these Texas Democratic lawmakers who left the state yesterday. They said, okay, you know, you want to pass a law making it harder for black people and brown people to vote. And by the way, it's not just black and brown people that the Republicans are specifically targeting with this law. And it's not just Texas. Texas is like, you know, the 10th or 12th or 14th Republican state to roll out one of these laws. Georgia was one of the first, and it caused national outrage. It's why Major League Baseball is playing their game in Colorado this week rather than in Atlanta. It's because of the Georgia law. So Texas, but they're not just targeting black and brown people, they're also targeting low-income people, young people, and people over 65 who tend to vote, you know, for Social Security and Medicare. And that's why, you know, the over 65 thing, that's why in Texas, your driver's license has to be current. Well, what if you're 80 years old and you don't drive anymore? Sorry, you can't vote. You can use a shooter's license, you can use your concealed carry permit in Texas to vote, but you can't use the ID from a state university that, by the way, does check your citizenship. It's a state-issued ID, but no, you can't use that. Why? Because young people use those. Young people right now, this generation, this millennial generation coming up, are overwhelmingly voting Democratic. And many of them, you know, are far more progressive than your mainstream Democrats. In fact, I'd say probably the majority of them. They're more like I am, you know. They're what, you know, we've called over the last 6 or 8 years Bernie-crats. Although, you know, that mantle goes way beyond Bernie Sanders did, which is exactly what Bernie wanted. He has become the mainstream. Isn't that cool? So what do we do with this? Well, the Texas legislators got on 2 chartered planes last night and flew to Washington, D.C. They're going to be there until there's 50 of them. And they're going to be there until August, when this special session that Greg Abbott has called expires, August 7th. And then they're going to fly back to Texas, and Greg Abbott, the Republican governor of Texas, says when they return, he's going to arrest them. Now, keep in mind, this is the same guy who put Crystal Mason, a young black woman who had gotten out of jail and didn't know that she wasn't eligible to vote, went to her polling place. They said, you're not on the list. And the polling person said, here's a provisional ballot, and we'll check your eligibility. She filled out the provisional ballot. They checked her eligibility, found that indeed she wasn't eligible to vote, and they never counted her vote. Crystal Mason was sentenced to 5 years in prison. She's serving her sentence right now. And then you've got, what's his name? Yeah, here we go. In fact, I contributed, I think, $100 to his bail fund. Hervis Rogers is his name, down in Texas. Same deal. And the thing that's, you know, he was an ex-felon, and he thought he could vote, and he couldn't. And here's the kicker. In 2007, the Texas House and Senate passed a law that would have, quote, required the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to provide written notification to discharged prisoners regarding their lack of voter eligibility, right? In other words, tell people when they get out of jail, by the way, you can't vote. They passed a law in 2007 requiring that. That law was vetoed by Rick Perry, who was the governor at the time. We don't want to tell the prisoners they can't vote. Are you kidding? We'd much rather rearrest them and make an example out of them for any black person or person of color who wants to vote. Because they're not going after white people for voting in Texas. They're going after black people. So what do we do with this? Do you think, I'm very hopeful that these 50 Texas legislators are going to bring a moral force with them. Now, you've also got, Moral Mondays, Reverend Barber. You got a bunch of people who are pushing really, really hard. Drill a hole in that filibuster, blow up that filibuster, do whatever it takes to pass the For the People Act. And Joe Biden's going to give a speech on it in about 2 hours.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So now is the time to be calling both your senators and your member of the House of Representatives. The phone number 202-224-3128. And welcome back. Donna in Wheaton, Illinois. Hey, Donna, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I just got a Facebook posting from my cousin in England about how the Delta virus has ripped through his family, and I wanted to share those details as succinctly as I can for your listeners. But the reason he has posted this is that apparently on Monday, Boris Johnson is lifting the restrictions in England.
Yeah, July 17th.
Does that sound familiar? Okay.
Yeah.
So, first of all, around June 15th, his daughter, who's in elementary school, came home and tested positive for the virus. She apparently got it from playing outdoors with her friends because she was on remote learning because so many of the teachers were out of school. Then his wife, who had both Pfizer shots, got a very heavy cold, tightness in her chest, went for a test, tested positive. 8 days later, his 2 boys tested positive, and 5 days after that, he got it, and he got the deluxe version. He had hallucinations, high fever, the whole thing. And he also, like his wife, had the Pfizer, both shots, and he is convinced that it was the vaccine that kept him out of the hospital because he had such a severe case. And he is warning people that on Monday, when these restrictions are lifted, people are going to be going back to the pubs. They're already flocking, all over the place on vacation. And he's saying, be careful, because if this is how seriously he was affected after the Pfizer shots, we already lost one person in the family a year ago or so when the virus first broke out, but he said this Delta thing is so transmissible that even outside, even among children, all those rules that we had in our heads about how you weren't likely to get this and that, and you can go maskless if you've been vaccinated.
You can get the Delta variant literally by walking by someone who is simply breathing. Simply walking by them, which is a huge difference from even the Alpha variant, which was twice as transmissible as the original COVID. And this is
out of doors.
Yeah. It's time for us all to start being very, very careful, Donna. And that's a cautionary tale. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot of those kind of cautionary tales, particularly in these areas. Right now, this variant here in Oregon, it doesn't appear like it's hit us yet. We're still around 100 people a day for the entire state, and all the people in the hospitals are unvaccinated.
Illinois is doing relatively well. We're not in the top 10 states for vaccination, but we're still, but you get lulled into this false sense of security because you think, okay, I'm vaccinated, I'm fine, and it isn't so,
Yeah, it'll still kick your ass. It's still a very, very dangerous disease, and it's just, the vaccine basically prevents you from dying. And but this is not a disease that anybody should be wanting to get. And I just why are the Republicans promoting this disease? It's just, I can't come up with any other reason than that it's an election strategy. Donna, I got to run, but thank you for the call. That was a tough one. We'll be right back. 22 minutes past.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmanReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmanReport.com. So in addition to having our daily rant over at HartmanReport.com and the newsletter, Sue's newsletter, that has links to literally every story we talk about throughout the show over at TomHartman.com, and you can sign up. It's free. We also push out a video to people who are supporters of our program at TomHartman.com every week. And the one that goes out this week is about Loudoun County, Virginia's public schools. There is a group that is opposed to teaching critical race theory. It's called PACT, Parents Against Critical Theory. And they've been promoting the work of a guy who is among the people who marched in the so-called Unite the Right rally, where Heather Heyer was killed. The Jews will not replace us, black people will not replace us march. And he's just like making stuff up. It's really a remarkable, remarkable story. You can see the whole thing over at TomHartman.com. Check it out. It's past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Greg Abbott says he's going to arrest these people when they return. That's going to make for some very interesting political theater. I'm kind of curious about all that. And by the way, Hervis Rogers, we did raise the $100,000 for his bail. $100,000 bail. He was not informed when he left prison that he couldn't vote because Rick Perry vetoed a law that would require the Texas Department of Corrections to inform people. Why would you veto a law like that? I mean, seriously, think about this for a minute. Why would a Republican governor veto a law telling felons as they get out of jail, or now ex-felons, as they get out of jail, by the way, you can't vote for in this state until your parole is over, your probation is over. Why would he veto a law like that? Because they want to make examples of people. They sent a black woman to prison for 5 years, Crystal Mason, for voting while she was still on probation. And her vote didn't even get counted. Hervis Rogers, he was the last guy in line. He got national attention because he stood in line for 6 hours to vote, and he voted just an hour before he had to go to his second job. This guy works 2 jobs. He's been sitting in jail for a couple of weeks. While a bunch of people out there on GoFundMe are trying to raise $100,000 to bail him out of jail. And like I said, I kicked in $100. I thought this is such an injustice. But it shouldn't be. They shouldn't have to be doing GoFundMes. This is, by the way, Ken Paxton, the guy who's prosecuting Mr. Rogers. Ken Paxton, the Attorney General for the state of Texas, 6 years ago was indicted for fraud. Securities fraud. He has an open indictment. He's been charged with a felony for 6 years. It has not yet gone to trial. He's essentially out on bail. The Attorney General of the state of Texas, Ken Paxton. The fraud charge, quote, alleges that he, quote, persuaded investors to buy stock in a technology firm without disclosing that he would be compensated for it. He faces 99 years in jail if he's convicted. He's also under FBI investigation for, quote, using his office to benefit a wealthy donor. Former senior aides to Paxton allege, quote, Austin real estate developer Nate Paul helped Paxton remodel his house and gave a job to a woman with whom Paxton allegedly had an affair. This is the guy who's like the great moral center of Texas. This is the guy who's prosecuting these people. This is the guy who's going to prosecute these Texas legislators when they fly home and send them to and keep them in jail? Ken Paxton, really? The guy who had an affair and then basically got out of it, helped his buddies, his real estate developer, helps this guy out. I mean, really?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Real estate developer Nate Paul helped Paxton remodel his house and gave a job to a woman with whom Paxton had an affair. Really? Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. The subtitle is How a Gang of Wall Street Kingpins, Hedge Fund Magnates, Crooked Banks, and Venture Capitalists suckered millions out of their homes and demolished the American dream. It's quite a subtitle. This is from chapter 21, titled Triumph of the Homewreckers. Donald Trump took the oath of office on a chilly Friday morning, delivering an inaugural address that promised an end to the corruption and impotence that had widened America's historic wealth gap. He understood that his victory had been propelled by harnessing the public's rage and envy at having been left behind in the economic recovery, and that he promised that he would not forget it. Evoking FDR's famous Forgotten Man speech from 1932 that promised to prioritize the needs of, quote, the man at the bottom of the economic pyramid, Trump declared, quote, the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Politicians had prospered, he said, but jobs had evaporated, factories closed. Quote, the establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little chance to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. This all changes, starting right here and right now, Trump proclaimed, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. This is your day. This is your celebration. End of quote. The moment, however, belonged not to the great mass of struggling Americans, but to the new president's most ardent supporters, flamboyant businessmen who profited off the pain of the housing bust and were now poised to steer the ship of state for at least the next 4 years. As Trump reached out his hand and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, his close friend and inaugural committee chair, Tom Barrack, stood behind him, smiling in a blue scarf and black overcoat. Afterward, Barrack and Trump embraced at the U.S. Capitol's inaugural platform. The homewreckers had arrived. Barrack didn't take an official position in the Trump administration, reportedly turning down an offer to be White House Chief of Staff, Treasury Secretary, or Ambassador to Mexico. Roger Stone told me he could have had any position he wanted, but working for the government would have meant making a lot less money. I don't think he has the belly for public service, Stone observed. Other homewreckers had no such qualms. If they changed the rules of the game now, they could make more money later. Steve Mnuchin, by now dubbed the foreclosure king by his critics, was confirmed as Treasury Secretary. His top deputy at One West, the bank, Joseph Otting, became the nation's chief bank regulator, the comptroller of the currency. Wilbur Ross, the bankruptcy tycoon who bought Florida's Bank United, became the Commerce Secretary, charged with everything from negotiating trade deals to overseeing the U.S. Census. Steve Schwarzman, the chairman of Blackstone, became chair of the White House's Strategic and Policy Forum, a group of business leaders who were to meet regularly with Trump. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase was named vice chair. Though the group disbanded over the summer after Trump's statement that bigotry and violence on many sides were responsible for a white nationalist killing a counter-protester in Charlottesville, Virginia, Schwarzman, along with Barrack, is said to be among a small group of outsiders, including Sean Hannity, who are put directly through to the president rather than being routed through the normal communications channels. Hannity reportedly chats with Trump nightly. Schwarzman has flown on Air Force One. On February 12, 2017, less than a month into Trump's presidency, while the commander-in-chief was dining with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan at his Mar-a-Lago golf club, Schwarzman threw a massive 70th birthday bash at his Four Winds estate, barely a mile and a half away. This time, neither Donald nor Melania Trump could make it, but daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner did, along with Mnuchin, Ross, and a who's who of high finance and culture, from Henry Kravis, co-founder of the hostile takeover firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, to the fashion designer Donatella Versace. The party featured live camels, trapeze artists, fireworks, and a gondolier. Schwarzman's tennis courts were covered with Asian-themed staging. The man who'd hired Patti LaBelle to sing Happy Birthday for his 60th was serenaded by Gwen Stefani on his 70th. After Happy Birthday, the peroxide pop star took a, quote, a quick twirl with the birthday boy around a dance floor constructed inside a two-story tent where acrobats shimmied and jumped, the New York Times reported. Unlike a decade before, when Schwartzman's glorious pre-bust bash sparked condemnation from sources as conservative as the Wall Street Journal, this time the festivities sparked very little blowback. In her story, Bloomberg reporter Amanda Gordon reveled in the comparison with Schwartzman's 60th. There were some differences, though. She wrote, "Remember that beautiful fur coat on Melania Trump? It was New York in February on a weeknight. This time, no bundling required, with many folks golfing and swimming all day before a balmy night and fireworks alongside a full moon." Howard Marks, the co-chairman of Oak Tree Capital, a vulture firm that had bought and flipped 3,000 foreclosures, told Gordon, quote, "The world is an uncertain place. A lot of people are unhappy with a lot of other people. There are a lot of things that people are upset about. So it's nice to have an evening where everybody's happy, harmonious, and upbeat." End quote. There was a lot of celebrating to be had. In June, the gang got together for the marriage of Steve Mnuchin and his third wife, actress Louise Linton, almost 2 decades younger than him. And then it continues from there. The book is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at TomHartman.com if you want to really support our program. Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at HartmanReport.com. And our podcast, our 1-hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through, iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts, cut down of our show. And that we post a weekly video over at TomHartman.com. And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to by force prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, TomHartman.com. So, let's see here. Claire in Fort Worth, Texas. Claire, it says you wanted to correct me about Texas voting laws. What did I get wrong?
The first thing is that we no longer deny on driver's licenses unless they're expired 4 years. That's because
really?
Jim Wright tried. Yeah, that's because Jim Wright tried to vote on an expired license. So there you go.
Oh, really?
But
Jim Wright used to be what? He was the Speaker of the House at one point, wasn't he? I mean,
yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Okay, so we took that first voter ID bill to court, and that was one of the resolutions. The other one was that if you don't have that ID and you cannot obtain one, we have an alternate method to allow a person to vote.
Right.
So.
But you've got to jump through some hoops to get there, right? I mean, you've got to go. You got to go someplace or do something.
Oh no! If they bring in the little card we get every 2 years that says that we are registered, if they bring that in and something official that's at the same address,
right?
Like the utility bill or something like that, we'll vote them. It won't be provisional.
Oh, that's great.
The state does not determine our voting locations. We do. The county commissioner's court has to approve the election board's choices. So we're getting new precincts this year, so they're going to drop a new map, and then they'll say, okay, we've got 325 precincts. We have 325 voting locations. We're going to cut these back because this one don't have any turnout, so we're going to pull them all together at this big one that's around the corner, and everybody goes there and vote. We do not have to vote in our home precinct. We can vote at any of those 325 locations on Election Day. We have 50 early voting locations, and anybody can vote there. I really have no patience with people who stand in line in our metropolitan counties because there's so many options. Harris County has like 800. So it's...
So, Claire, it says here you're an election chair.
I'm an election judge and a precinct chair.
Okay.
And,
I have read, in fact, I read it in the New York Times last week, that Texas has the most restrictive voting laws in the country. What you're telling me seems to contradict that. What am I missing, and how will things change if this law that Greg Abbott is championing right now
gets passed?
The things that I have mentioned to you, they might mess with that 4-year thing, although I doubt it because a federal appeals court kind of rewrote that voter ID bill. VZV Texas was the case. And they could try to mess with that, but I haven't found that that's addressed in the bill.
Yeah.
So, and they're not going to mess with voting centers or countywide voting because that was something that all the counties got together and wanted to do. And all of our big counties with the big populations are using it because it's so helpful. And the counties love it because they can cut down on the number of people they have to pay and the rent they have to pay on locations. So it's a pretty good thing. And I'm a court-appointed alternate judge. So the Commissioner's Court has to appoint me. Any changes that we make in the precinct layout or voting locations has to be approved by the Commissioner's Court.
Right.
Commissioner's Court had to approve our new voting system, and we have 100% paper trail on everything. Crystal Mason was put in jail by a local judge, and that's in appeal. That's going to be in appeal forever. And the guy down in Houston needs to join that case. But I think that's everything. I'm running out of breath.
Okay.
But,
so, Claire, it's not quite as bad as I characterized it. But,
no, it's better than, like, we're not fooling around with water and food. It's hot down here, and we'll have cases of water outside that 100-foot line. Now, the one thing that we did because of COVID that they might mess with is we did have a form of drive-through voting.
Right.
It was just for people who had mail-in ballots, and because of all the things, our elections office set up a voting system at our central office, one location, but we had 25 little tents where people could pull under that tent, show their ID, hand over their sealed ballot to a person, and it would go in and go through the
so
normal
they weren't
process.
actually even voting, drive-through voting, and they call it drive-through voting, but it was actually drive-through, hand in your remote, your what do you call it, absentee ballot.
And we were always allowed to do that, but only on Election Day. And I was like, oh, I forgot to mail this. Let me go take it up there.
Right.
But the COVID and the post office and everything, the governor did this.
Right.
Well,
he's trying
when
to undo
they
it now.
did some other things to do COVID, the governor says, okay, you can drop those ballots off at the designated location for the entire early voting period, which starts when we get our ballot in the mail, those of us who get it.
Right.
So we had this constant stream of people for that whole 3 weeks dropping off ballots at the elections office.
Right, and they're trying to do away with that.
I
mean, that's what I'm reading in the paper.
Yeah. Now, we didn't do what Houston did where we set it up for all kinds of voting. You know, you could, right. But curbside voting with our system is a pain in the neck, and we hate it. It's a mess, and it's an exception for disabled people in this county.
Right. Well, that's actual voting, not handing in the ballot. But
Exactly.
what they're trying to do right now is even
ordeal.
stop that you can hand in the ballot.
Yeah. I do not know what's going to come out of that. I haven't read anything that we're not going to be able to, but they may cut that time back to Election Day only.
Yeah.
But we've never had drop boxes. That is not new. That is very old.
Well, Claire, you've been very informative.
I try to be.
And I do appreciate it. Thank you very much. I need to move along, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. And thank you for watching Free Speech.
Bye-bye.
Good talking with you. Mike in Bryan, Texas. Hey, the Texas callers are coming out of the woodwork here today. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Yeah, Tom.
No woodwork implied. I didn't mean that in a negative way. I'm very happy about it.
No umbrage taken. I just wanted to talk about our governor. As you know, he has politicized law enforcement even further. He's operating a kind of crypto-fascist operation.
How so?
Trying to.
What causes you to say that, Mike?
Well, he's given people to make arrests of our rightfully elected Democrat and independent legislators.
Yeah. Well, he has the. I mean, it's apparently against the law in Texas to flee the state in order to deny the legislature a quorum, and so if he's got the law, he can enforce it. It's not like. Are you suggesting this is selective enforcement? I mean, I thought they were threatened with arrest the last time they left town.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you probably remember that our fascists in law enforcement were emboldened enough to publicly declare support for Donald Trump before the last election, which was something, that civil people in a civil society normally did not do. But talking about laws, I mean, their selective application of the law and the Constitution is just astounding. But I wanted to ask you, because I know you talked about fascism before, if you studied the Phalange and like that little radical racist faction of the Catholic Church, and this is alluding to our appointments to the Supreme Court, and their support to Mussolini and Hitler, especially in Catholic Bavaria, and how even though the overwhelming majority of Catholics support the Pope and his Christ-like teachings, there is just that minority, just like in our body politic, this roughly 30%, that it's their way or the highway, and they're using any means, however violent. And I'm sure you know that our governor in Texas, Mr. Abbott, hasn't allowed people to carry concealed handguns.
Yeah, I know.
As they please in this state.
Yeah, I know. But I get what you're saying. I think that it's not so much like let's treat this as a conspiracy theory. I think we need to understand it in a much larger frame. John Dean, Richard Nixon's old attorney, or the White House counsel, just published a new book about this. He had a previous book as well. This one he wrote, co-authored with Bob Altmaier, who originally wrote a book called The Authoritarians back about 15, 20 years ago. And now the two of them have a new book out, which follows on Dean's last book that he was on this show about, Conservatives Without Conscience. And what they're arguing is that pretty much anybody in the field of psychology will tell you that about 20% roughly, maybe as much as 30% of the population have strong authoritarian tendencies, the vast majority of them being authoritarian followers. There's a small number of authoritarian leaders. The authoritarian leaders and the authoritarian followers fit together like a lock and a key. And so you have that authoritarian movement within the Catholic Church. You've got that authoritarian movement within the Republican Party. I'm guessing there's an authoritarian movement in the Democratic Party, although I'm not real familiar with it. It might be that we're kind of the anti-authoritarians, but I think that's just a reality of human nature that we have to acknowledge and figure out how to work around, because authoritarianism can destroy democracy really, really rapidly. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. Nice to hear from our Texas listeners. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler prize. And welcome back, Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, thanks for calling, and I'm sorry for the wait. What's on your mind today?
Oh, no problem. I love your question because I always want to go to that big picture so I can understand everything underneath that everybody's talking about.
The question being, why are Republicans promoting death and disease?
Yes, and then we tacked on morality to that too. So, which of course they're one and the same. But I see the billionaire oligarchs as puppeteering the people bought and paid for, known as the Republicans. The Republican Party, I think, is really an empty set. I think it's just people bought and paid for.
Yeah.
And I think the wealthy kings are the puppeteers with the main goals of convincing Americans that their social status is based on who they are above and not who they are below.
Oh, that's interesting.
And to convince, I think it's,
I never thought of that.
I mean, if you read Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, the little girls and the little boys had to find somebody worse off than they were. And they found this awful life of this awful little girl, and they made it more miserable so they could feel better. And it's just the lowest of low. But that's how I think that these wealthy billionaires manipulate people. So they want to convince Americans where their social status should be.
Well, that actually, Lori, that's what Lyndon Johnson said. He said if you can convince the lowest white man that he's higher than the highest black man, he'll let you pick his pocket all day long. Hell, he'll turn his pockets inside out for you.
They're into the morality. And morality is determined by, this is what I think. Okay. I think it's not determined by anything the Republicans do. Come on. Morality is determined by these billionaire oligarchs, by Democratic transgressions. And to discuss Republicans in an attempt, is just trying to deflect. Yeah. You cannot discuss Republicans because obviously you're not admitting that it's the Democrats.
Right, so Bill Clinton and Al Franken were immoral people. Al Franken didn't even have an affair. He just made a joke. They're immoral people, but Donald Trump raping E. Jean Carroll, well, that's just, he's a man's man.
Al Franken put his hand over a Kevlar vest.
Well, and it was 2 or 3 inches above it too. He didn't actually physically contact her body. It was 2 or 3 inches above it, and for that he was really he was screwed. But to discuss and then the more COVID, now you go to COVID, the more COVID you have, I think it makes Biden look as bad as Trump. You see, Trump wasn't so bad. Look at Biden. Here we go. No, but I'm saying there's this kind of abstraction that when the economy tanks, the party in power loses. And that's the game that the Republicans are playing right now.
Exactly.
They're trying to tank the economy. They want us all to be going, oh my God, COVID is here. It's the Delta variant. People are dying. We need to shut down the economy. We need to close the stores. And when that happens, the stock market goes to hell and,
That's true. You're right. And it's just killing off more Social Security and Medicare recipients. Don't forget.
Well, and now, the Delta variant is killing off 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. It's like, the Social Security folks are all vaccinated. But your point is well made.
I know. We're the non-white Americans. Come on, guys.
There you go. Okay. Lori, I got to run. Thank you for the call. Very insightful. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. Over at the Thom Hartmann website, thomhartmann.com, we have, the full podcasts and there's just a lot of information, and our newsletter. And the newsletter is extraordinary. It's free. Sue puts it together every day with her stack, and it's just great content. Links to every single article that I talk about on the air, and things that are peripheral to them as well. It's really worth the effort. And then, of course, at HartmannReport.com, there is my daily rant, which is typically incorporated into the program, but it's a written version of it, and that's also something that there's no cost for that at all. So you can check that out as well. Also, we've got a new video up about the dueling memes. If at first you don't succeed, try again, or the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Schumer is going to try to do what Harry Reid did in 2013 by forcing votes. Will it work? We'll see. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. No, it's actually 8 minutes before the hour. And Zeke in Portland. Hey, Zeke, what's on your mind?
Tom, before I get into my little rant here, I wanted to say that I think you're the man who carries the spear of truth for the American people. And I hope you're taking good care of yourself.
Thank you, Zeke.
We cannot afford to. I know you are, and I appreciate it. I agree with you totally on what the Republicans are doing, and where I differ with you. I don't call them Republicans anymore. I mean, Bill Kristol, the Lincoln Project people, Michael Steele, yeah, they're Republicans. But these people are now the American Fascist Party. They are fascists.
By and large, I can't disagree with that.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I have in front of me on my computer screen the quote from Dwight David Eisenhower, the only Republican president in my lifetime. I'm 71. So I was very much up and around when he was president. Mm-hmm. And he said in 56, if a political party does not have its foundation in the determination to advance a cause that is right and that is moral, then it is not a political party. It is merely a conspiracy to seize power. And what we have now is a fascist conspiracy to seize power. And the American Republic is under every bit as much threat as the United Kingdom was when Hitler and Goering were raining death and destruction from the skies. But now the bombs that we face come in the form of the big lie, the weaponization of COVID by the fascists, the attempt to destroy democracy by passing all these laws in the Republican states. Et cetera.
Dean Obeidallah was telling me last night, I was on his show last night, we had a long conversation, which I really enjoyed. Dean is a smart guy, good lawyer, a smart guy, and a great talk show host. And he was telling me about a Netflix movie that he watched, which I have not yet had a chance to track down, called something like Hitler, A Career. And he said, when you watch the rise of power, Hitler, of course, in 1923, organized his beer hall putsch, where he shot a gun into the ceiling of this beer hall and jumped up on the table and gave an hour-long speech. And then he led this huge crowd this was in Munich, in Bavaria, and he led this huge crowd to the seat of the state capital, basically, the Bavarian capital, and tried to seize power, tried to kick out the governor and put himself in place. He was arrested for this. He spent, I think, a little over a year in jail, which is where he wrote Mein Kampf. And then he spent 10 years coming back. And that's what we're watching right now with Trump. And Dean was telling me, oh my God, it's just the exact same thing. There's no difference. And I think he's absolutely right. Zeke, thanks for the call. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's up?
Hey, afternoon, Tom. On your question of the Republicans, promoting, advocating for disease and death, it's an absolute yes. The why, I don't know, but the response that we can begin to consider, and I think this is on an individual by individual case basis, and then larger as a group, but there's liability here that we're already seeing, and we see it in individual cases. People get sick, people die. There's a lot of loss of business that is going to be occurring now in the Confederate States of Trump, where cases are on the rise. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the larger societal costs of each individual, COVID hospitalization of $1 million, $2 million. And we've got to seriously look at these people who willfully refused to participate in a sensible health measure. Yeah. And, whether or not they have culpability, whether or not their claims should be paid, whether or not, public health benefits should pay for that hospitalization when they decline their opportunity.
Well, I'm waiting for, as I said before, I'm waiting for the for-profit insurance companies to start saying, hey, you don't give us this $300,000 ICU bill. You didn't have a vaccine.
You remember the early AIDS hysteria. They were allowed to get away with it for a couple of years. AIDS people were rejected and denied things. I mean, eventually they had to change that. But for the first 2 years, insurers were able to say, you lived recklessly, you're on your own.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't recall that detail, but it doesn't surprise me. Eric, thank you for the call. We will be back. We're going to continue the program right after this. Well, hang on.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified. We have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea and the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Liddite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home, a temple to the new India, or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back to the third hour of our program. You've probably noticed the coverage on television and in the media in general about protests in Cuba. People are in the streets, or at least they were. The story today is that the police are in the streets. And Leonardo Flores is on the line with us, Latin American policy analyst and campaigner with Code Pink, codepink.org. Leonardo, EFA is his Twitter handle, and Code Pink is, of course, at Code Pink on Twitter. Codepink.org as well, if I didn't say that already. I think I did. Leonardo, welcome to the program. Tell us what's the story behind the story here. I'm assuming it has an awful lot to do with the Trump administration changing the Obama administration policies toward Cuba. I was, Louise and I, my wife and I were down in Cuba for a week on a trip that you guys put together, Code Pink, back when President Obama was president. And it was quite the place. We had a marvelous time. But things changed considerably under Trump.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks so much for the invitation, Tom, first of all.
Sure.
And really, we have to say that it goes beyond Trump. This story, what's behind the protest really is the 60-plus year embargo that the United States has imposed on Cuba. It's an economic war that has affected every person in Cuba, and it's really affected every sector of society and the economy. And so people, we're talking about thousands of people that took to the streets on Sunday to protest basically two things. One is the economic conditions that the Cuban people are currently facing. And second, there was an uptick in surge in COVID cases that collapsed a hospital in the state of Matanzas in Cuba, and people are very upset about that. But of course, we all have to put this in perspective. So when we talk about thousands of people on the streets in Cuba, it really is, quite possibly the biggest protest in Cuba in 30 years. But, the Cuban Revolution itself routinely turns out hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million people for their own marches and rallies. So, in 2 weeks, it's going to be the anniversary of July 26th, part of the huge date for the Cuban Revolution. And I'm sure we're going to see hundreds of thousands of people on the streets in Cuba supporting the revolution. So it all has to be kept in perspective. But yeah, you're right. A big part of it has to do with the Trump administration because they worsened sanctions on Cuba during the pandemic. They imposed sanctions about energy, tourism, banking, and other sectors, and they limited remittances that Cuban Americans sent back to the island, and they also limited travel as well.
All right. So, which is just it's just tightening the screws. I mean, it's terribly tightening the screws. So, are there any indications that the Biden administration? I'm hearing this kind of tough talk, and I'm guessing that they're pandering to particularly to the Cuban American vote in South Florida that tends to go very Republican. I don't know why they even bother, but. Saying, well, we're with the Cuban people, this kind of stuff. But is there any serious discussion in our government today of going back to the Obama-era policies of essentially liberalizing our relationship with Cuba? That, when Louise and I were there, one of the things that we found was that there were all these little restaurants that were opening all over town. Free enterprise, if you want to, I'm not sure you could call it full-blown capitalism, but free enterprise was flourishing when we were there, at least in Havana and the one in the small town that we visited. The government has been adopting what you might call arguably some progressive changes. What's the status of our government's relationship to that? It seemed like we were helping them move in the right direction.
Right. So when President Biden was campaigning, he actually promised to go back to the Obama-era policy, which was basically re-engagement, rapprochement. There was diplomatic ties between the countries were fully restored. There was this kind of an impulse towards lifting the blockade. That didn't happen, of course. But now what we're seeing is that because of these protests, particularly from the reaction from the right wing in Florida, as you said, the Biden administration seems to be pulling back a bit. I think he had a statement yesterday or the day before where he called on, the Cuban authorities to grant the Cuban people the right to freely determine their own future. But that's impossible in the context of a blockade, of an embargo, of course. The embargo has cost Cuba $150 billion over the last 6 years. And it also cost the U.S. economy quite a bit. The Chamber of Commerce says that it costs $1.2 billion a year to the U.S. economy itself, while the Cuba Policy Foundation places that number at $4.8 billion. But we haven't seen the Biden administration take any steps towards Cuba. When they've been called on it by the press, the reaction has been, well, we're reviewing the policy right now. And basically what we understand, the Cuba followers and analysts, is that the administration is focusing on Iran, and they don't want to jeopardize talks with Iran and they feel that they might in terms of what the Senate will do if they also take on the issue of Cuba right now.
They don't think they can walk and chew gum at the same time?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. They can't do it in part because of Robert Menendez, an important Democratic senator from New Jersey, who was also Cuban American and very much against the Obama-era policy. But we're seeing a huge groundswell of support from the grassroots to lift the embargo, and in Congress as well. Just last March, there were 80 House Democrats wrote a letter to President Biden urging him to lift the Trump-era sanctions and begin again this process of normalization with relations with Cuba.
The big lesson that I got from the time that Louise and I spent there was that if you think that helping Cuba move out of a somewhat rigid communist or neo-communist or whatever you want to call it, entirely state-run model into the beginnings of a free enterprise model where people can start small businesses but very, very limited in so that they're not repeating essentially the mistakes we're making, where now we have an economy that is completely dominated by giant monopolies. I would not call our economy free at all. But if you want to see the move in a direction that seems like a positive, what at least seemed to me a positive direction, then engage them, right? You know, allow tourism, allow trade. You know, I realize I may be sounding a little like a classic neoliberal here, but correct me if I'm off in some kind of fantasy here, Leonardo.
No, I think you're right. I mean, if the idea from the United States is to influence Cuba in a positive way, and the only way to do that is to have diplomatic relations, to engage in trade, to engage in a free exchange of ideas. None of that is happening right now because of the Trump sanctions and because of the limits that the Trump administration put on the bilateral relationship with Cuba. On top of that, you know, Cuba is a country that just wrote a new constitution, that submitted it to a referendum in 2019. It was something like 81% voter turnout. 90% of the people voted yes to this new constitution, which includes some sort of liberalization, so to speak, of the economy, including the right to own property. So we are seeing some steps in that direction. But it should also be noted that Cuba, despite all these difficulties, despite the economic warfare of the United States for over 60 years, Cuba is a country that has high human development according to the United Nations Development Program. And that's because Cuba, for the last 60 years, has been investing in healthcare, in education, in the social safety net, in contrast to, say, the United States, which has been investing in war and police for the past 60 years. And we see a big marked difference there.
Oh, and that was very clear. And I mean, Cuba's major export is doctors, for God's sake. Last question here. We're going to run out of time in a minute, but what is, when we were there, they were, in fact, we visited one of the medical schools, and they were developing, remedies and new drugs and things that were just, cutting edge stuff. What is the status of vaccination for COVID in Cuba right now? Do they have access to Pfizer? Do they have access to our pharmaceuticals? Are they buying them from China or from Russia? Are they developing their own? What's going on there with that in that context?
They don't have any access to the COVAX system, which is and other private vaccines, whether it's Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca. In fact, Cuba is actually developing 5 of its own vaccines. And my understanding is that 2 of those have already been approved by Cuban health authorities, and they have a 91% and a 92% efficiency rating. So very successful vaccines that they're developing. Already 2 million Cubans have been vaccinated, which only represents roughly around 20% of the population. And the biggest restriction right now, the biggest impediment to vaccinating the entire population is that there's a shortage of syringes in Cuba. And that shortage is, again, entirely due to the U.S. embargo on Cuba. In fact, at Code Pink, with Global Health Partners and other organizations, we just raised around $500,000 to buy syringes and send them to Cuba for their vaccination program. On top of that, Cuba has promised to produce 100 million vaccines that it will share with the Global South. So really, if Cuba can get going with its vaccination program and can solidify these vaccines that they're developing, it's going to be a big boom to people all over the world who don't have access to the vaccine.
Remarkable. Leonardo Flores, the Latin American policy analyst and campaigner with CodePink.org. Leonardo EFA is his Twitter handle, and CodePink, of course, Twitter handle, CodePink.org. Leonardo, thanks a lot for dropping by. It was very informative. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
Good talking with you, and keep up the great work. Code Pink is just one of our great organizations out there. We'll be back with your calls and the news of the day after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In fact, if you were on hold and you dropped off, you could give us a shout back and we'll pick up your phone call. Stick around. And welcome back. Hillary in Boerne, Texas. Hey, Hillary, our third Texas caller today. What's up?
Well, yeah, we're on a rant because we hate our governor. And it's hard to follow Code Pink because we love them. Thanks for having them on. I have 3 topics all related to Texas, what's going on. You had Claire on, who was an election official, who said how safe our machines are, which they're not. They've been sold a bill of goods about the ES&S express vote machines, and I refer to Jenny Cohen, who's an election security. So she's Jenny COHN1 on Twitter, who constantly talks about how Express Vote meets all state must-haves, but it's not a paper trail. They have sold it as a paper trail, and the election officials who buy it believe it's a paper trail, but it's not. You go home with a little piece of paper, but it's not the same as filling out a hand-marked paper ballot. It's not countable like a hand-marked paper ballot. So it's not.
Is this
they have that in mind
the
now.
contraption that that prints out what looks like a filled-in ballot that's got a QR code on it, and then they read the QR code rather than the ballot itself?
Yes,
And
you
that's
walk
the problem,
from you go.
is you have no idea what that
like
QR code carries?
Right. So it's like a touch screen, and then you walk with your little printout and you drop it in a box. But I read extensively about it because my county was about to buy them, and I jumped and screamed, but they bought them anyway.
Yeah.
So
Greg
and then
Palast has
I'd like
been
to.
all over that one.
I got an email this morning from my representative Chip Roy, who's the jerk who this week actually finally told the truth about what the GOP is doing. So I never gave them my email address, so I'm sure they're purchasing email addresses of their constituents. And I got an innocuous email about renewing my passport and how the lines are long. And I was subscribed to his email feed. So I wrote back something that was, should be edited, but I voted for Wendy. Yeah. And I'm sure, my email went straight to the FBI. But I had to unsubscribe. So I think they're doing, and I'm not a registered Democrat. I'm an independent on purpose.
One of the things that I've done, Hillary, is when I'm signing up for a site, like when I signed up with Donald Trump, I signed up as Fred Flintstone. When I signed up with one of the larger right-wing groups, I signed up as Barney Rubble. When I actually have to use my name, the middle name that I plug in is always the name of that website. So if I'm registering myself with Walgreens Pharmacy, I'm Thomas Walgreen Hartman. And that way, when I get an email that's to Thomas Walgreen Hartman from, Macy's trying to sell me something, I know who sold my list or sold my name.
Okay, that's good. That's interesting.
Yeah,
so
it's served me well over the years.
So I think they're buying email lists.
Yeah.
And to their constituents.
Probably just lists of registered voters. I mean, those lists are easily available.
Okay, list of registered independents they're going after now. So,
could be.
Okay, and the other thing I just wanted to talk quickly about is the Republican who was arrested for voter fraud in near San Antonio in February for trying to get himself reelected. Thomas Ramirez, he's actually a personal injury lawyer in San Antonio. With one of those, TV ads, call me, I'm going to focus.
Amazing. Hillary, I got to run. I'm sorry. I hear more about that. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmanReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmanReport.com. We try to have a lot of content over at TomHartman.com, and of course, every day my daily rant goes up at HartmanReport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have, podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be, or the full 3-hour program. It's a 1-hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3-hour podcast available at TomHartman.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann program. It's over at TomHartman.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at TomHartman.com. Well, welcome back. Lines are open, as they say in the radio business. Carol in Menneson, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I haven't heard anyone bring this up, but I wonder how many, pardon me, how many of these Republicans like Trump, the older CPAC people, and the liars at Fox who tell people not to get vaccinated would be alive today if presidents like FDR, Truman, and Eisenhower had told people not to take the smallpox, measles, diphtheria, chickenpox, tetanus,
I remember polio
and whooping cough vaccine.
Yeah, in 1957, I was like in second grade or something like that, third grade, whatever it was. I remember, getting the polio vaccine.
Yeah.
In
I mean,
public
how many
school.
people?
And it was, I'm assuming it was mandated. I mean, maybe it wasn't like you will go to jail, but, they came into our school.
Oh, absolutely. And we weren't allowed to go to school at all until we got the smallpox vaccine.
Yeah.
But I wonder how many of these people, has it occurred to them that they might not even be alive today if the Republicans like Eisenhower or even people like Trump and FDR had said, I don't want you to get these vaccinations. They're dangerous.
Yeah.
They might not even be alive today to tell us not to get them.
Well, this is one of the things where, I put out this challenge and nobody has called yet and suggested a reason other than, a good substantial reason other than that the Republicans are trying to tank the economy for why they're promoting death and disease. One possibility that occurred to me, Carol, that nobody has mentioned and that I didn't mention in my article, but thinking back to my conversations here on the air with psychiatrist Justin Frank, the professor of psychiatry at George Washington University. And we were talking about the cruelty is the point. There's actually a book out about that now, and it's about the policy of tearing families apart. But that, he pointed out that there are some people who actually get pleasure out of watching other people be in pain or even die. And he asserted on this program, if I'm remembering correctly, that he believed that Donald Trump was one of those people and that many of his followers probably had a similar sentiment or similar worldview. And so it's possible that they're just doing it out of the pure joy of watching people die and get sick. But I can't believe that that's like right across the whole party,
Yeah, that's my feeling, Tom. I honestly believe that the fact that Trump is heading this party right now and that they are pretty much going with what he wanted. I mean, I totally agree with Justin Frank that he's one of these people who are absolutely into cruelty, into being sadistic, and they're just following his leader. Yeah. They're following their leader, and they're just letting people die because that's what he wanted to do even back when. I mean, we remember that. He told everybody back then it was a hoax, and he knew it wasn't a hoax. He knew exactly what it was.
Right. And it's not going to magically disappear, as he said. I mean,
no, and I don't even think it's about the economy. I think cruelty is the point.
Yeah.
That's sad, but that's pretty much how I believe.
Yeah.
What I believe.
Well, but there are so many Republicans who are totally on board with this. I just can't imagine that. There's a bunch of Republicans, in the House of Representatives sitting around in the House, lunchroom. The restaurant or dining room, I guess they call it, having a conversation where one of them says, you see this here in Missouri? We've got another, 12,000 people were just diagnosed and the ICUs are overflowing. Isn't that fun? Aren't we enjoying watching these people in pain? I can't imagine a conversation where they're saying, well, the ICUs are starting to fill up. The hospitals are starting to fill up. Pretty soon they're going to start shutting down the economy. And when that happens, the market's going to tank. And when that happens, we're going to win the 2022 elections. I can actually imagine that conversation.
I doubt that they had that conversation, but at the same time, even if I don't see how they can continue to call themselves the party of pro-life. I mean, obviously, if they're against abortion, they wouldn't be wanting to kill their own people. Yeah. And that's who are mostly going to die because of these not getting the vaccine.
Well,
it will
we already have
largely be Republicans, won't it?
Yeah, 607,000 people are already dead. And our hospitals are filled up again, and they're all unvaccinated people, or almost all, So anyhow, we'll continue the conversation. Carol, thank you. It's always nice to hear from you, and thank you for watching us on Free Speech TV. I'll be picking up your phone calls right after this. It is coming up on, it's 27 and a half minutes past. The Tom Hartman Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. We'll be back with your calls right after this.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at TomHartman.com if you want to really support our program. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at TomHartman.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at HartmanReport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies, 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at TomHartman.com and at HartmanReport.com. And welcome back. Tom Hartman here with you, picking up your phone calls. Tim in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Well, I've got an idea here that might be perhaps a solution, albeit out of the box solution for the ballot issue in the drop-off boxes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, historically, state and federal governments all have solicited private organizations and companies and everything from helping to build bombers to, just as we saw with COVID, providing free masks as a private service, public service. So I got to thinking, why don't we create a consortium between, rather than try to fight for federal and state legislation changes, why don't we just go to the private companies, the big ones that are out there, a lot of the ones that demographically have the ability to and provide already a service to the community. Here's an example. Okay, you deserve a change today, so get up and vote today at McDonald's, right? I mean, why doesn't every McDonald's have a drop-off box? And all you would have to do is have a state or national certified ballot that was delivered to you at home, and you drive up to the drop-off box, takes a quick 2-second snap photo for a database to determine who dropped
I get everything
it
you're
off.
saying, Tim. We have, for 20 years here in Oregon now, been doing it exclusively by mail. And so every one of us has a drop-off box at our home or apartment or wherever we live. And I mean, even people who share a residence or are homeless, there's still a mailbox, public mailboxes on the streets. And, if you can get a ballot, you can drop it off. So I would say if you want to partner with private corporations to encourage voting, let's do that to encourage voter registration.
to get people on the voting rolls. But really, I mean, you know, we had the caller from Sweden yesterday who was telling us, you know, when you're born, you're on the, you know, you're enrolled as a citizen, and when you turn 18, you automatically are enrolled to vote, and you just, you know, comes in the mail.
Yeah, I heard that call, and that was a great phone call. But you got to remember, we're not 50 United States; we're 50 separate fighting states, and every state has got its own. You know, besides gerrymandering, I mean, they've created and they are creating these obscene ways to limit voting. But if we had national companies take it upon themselves as a public service to make it a priority to enable average people to just go up and simply drop a ballot box. I mean,
what I would rather see is an advertisement on TV, you know, where McDonald's is also selling their fish burgers or something, or if they've got the new Beyond Meat chicken. And then at the end of it, they've got a little pitch for voting. But Tim, keep thinking. I think you're onto something. That's a good one. David in Leadwood, Missouri. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I blame Missouri, our COVID resurgence, on our good governor, Mr. Parsons, because he never got public and said, you know, the COVID is really bad, and gave a little guidance to, you know, restrictions and wearing masks. I mean, it was the last thing he would ever mention. And so you had all the counties around St. Louis and Kansas City. They had to work these things out, and you can go from one county to the other, and the amount of people in the restaurants and which restaurants were open, and it all depended on what county you were in. And he never gave any uniform conformity and pushed and said, this is serious. And, you know, we're right in a Mason-Dixon line. I do believe the majority of Missouri is Democratic, but, you know who we have our representative.
Oh, the Missouri Compromise. I mean, that led to the Civil War. You guys there in Missouri now, I don't know where Leadwood is, but Missouri is now the worst in the nation, and Arkansas and Alabama are creeping up behind. I'm guessing Mississippi's not far behind that.
Right, and I've been on the governor because he never really said it was bad. He never stressed it. And I watched the Illinois governor, he's Democratic governor. He was out there at the get-go, and they're so close to us, but they're still so low.
Oh, yeah, no, I get that. Where I was going with that, David, was to ask you the question, is your local media covering this story? How is the, your local newspapers, your local TV and radio stations, in their coverage of COVID, are they encouraging people to get vaccinated?
They're failing, Tom. They put out very little information, and just today, finally, they mentioned on the local media that the people that are not getting the shots are the ones that are getting COVID. Yeah. I mean, this is how, how long we've been in
it's been a year and a half.
Yeah, but I mean, Missouri's been bad for the last month or two, and now just finally they're saying, that if you haven't gotten your shot, you're most likely, those are the people that are getting it. But the medical community has been wonderful. It's easy to get a shot in Missouri. You can get them anywhere. But I blame it on the governor for not, getting some uniformity with and stressing that it's bad. He's a Trumpster.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'm still, trying to figure this one out. Why are Republicans promoting death and disease? And if you have a suggestion that beats my suggestion that I think it's an election strategy, I'd love to hear it. Britt in Eureka, California, listening on KGOE. Hey, Britt, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on. Well, as it turns out, you are 100% correct.
You think?
There is no explanation other than the explanation that you've given. Let's look back at Mitch McConnell's words. He is 100% against preventing the Biden administration from succeeding.
All right.
So they've already said it. They've come right out and said it. They want to basically risk Americans' lives in the attempt to win an election.
So
that's essentially what's going on here.
If I'm right about this, if you're also right, Britt, and this is exactly what's going on, then how do we respond to this?
I think as early and as often as we can, starting, of course, with your show, we need to call them out with those exact words. They are risking American lives to
try
tell
to win
a
elections.
false story, to tell a false story that the Biden administration did not succeed in rolling out the vaccines. I mean, this is the story you're going to hear starting this fall all the way through the election in 2022.
And then they're going to start calling it the Trump vaccine and saying, why didn't more people get the Trump vaccine? And I mean, I think you could kind of game theory this out. It's but
you're doing a great job of it, and I think exactly you are the voice that can lead, that can carry this out, which is that Americans are at risk from Republican behavior to try and win an election. In 2022, the congressional elections, they're going to risk American lives by trying to convince Republicans and
it's not. They're just not going to. I mean, they're actually actively doing this as we speak. I mean, that's the part that just makes my head explode. It's just how can I can't imagine. Now, I mean, Tucker Carlson going on TV refusing to say if he's vaccinated or not. Obviously, the guy's vaccinated. Come on, I'm sure. He's not a stupid man. He's a multimillionaire. Which doesn't necessarily equate to intelligence, but he's a very smart guy, and he's got incredible resources, and he's not going to risk all that by getting COVID. And he goes on TV and scares the hell out of people about the vaccine. How can this guy sleep at night?
And then Alex Berenson at the CPAC conference, encouraging the crowd to say, to cheer him when he says you guys aren't getting vaccinations. That's great for America. That's an outrage. I mean, it's really sad for America right now. And I'm so proud of you and the rest of.
It's like if Mohammed bin Salman, the emperor of Saudi Arabia, were to decide that he really was pissed off at America because we wanted to hold him to account for killing Khashoggi, and so he wants to just destroy us. He's going to really hurt this country. I think probably the most effective thing he could do is pour a few $1 million into a vaccine disinformation campaign on Facebook and Twitter to try to cause people not to get vaccinated. In fact, he may well be doing it. We know that this is one of the messages that's coming out of some of the Russian trolls. We know that it's coming out of some of the Chinese trolls. We know it's coming out of this Chinese cult, that publishes a newspaper here. For foreigners to be saying this, yeah, of course they want to hurt our country. They want to hurt our citizens. I don't think you have to be a fulminating nativist to understand the possibility of that. But to have American citizens, elected officials, and people in the American media who are being paid millions of dollars a year to deliver information to people, just lying through their teeth about about this vaccine and about what happens and all this stuff. It's more than I can fathom. I mean, I try to put myself. I'm in the media, right? I mean, it's not this platform is nowhere near the size of Fox News, but I'm in the media, and I can't imagine looking into this camera or talking into this microphone and telling people things that I know are going to kill them, or get them really sick, or disable them because somehow it's going to politically advantage my side. I just can't imagine it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And so, therefore, I'm thinking there's got to be a reason. What's the reason? Well, it's probably power and money. Those are the things that typically drive people. That and sex. I don't see where anybody's getting sex out of this. And welcome back. Carol in Eagan, Minnesota. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Okay, I can't disagree, but I'm going to add some fire to the flame to the fire.
Okay.
Think about the advertising. If enough people die, they will be able to do comparisons with what Donald did that was so great, because look at Biden, even with all of this extra help, which Donald didn't have, hasn't done any better than Donald did with nothing.
So, if I understand correctly what you're saying, Carol, or at least my interpretation of what you're saying is that, Trump when Trump left office, 500,000 Americans were dead. So if they can kill another 500,000 and throw in a couple 100,000 for good measure, then by the 2024 election, when Trump says he's going to run for re-election, or has been kind of, tweaking us that he will, that he'll be able to say, well, Biden killed as many people as I did. Come on, don't pick on me. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
That would be it would be
but
all
they're
about
killing
the
Republicans. This is the thing that's so baffling. I mean, this is CNN is starting to point this out. You take a map of the election of 2020, and all the red states that went for Donald Trump, and then you take a map of where COVID is erupting and people are dying and ICUs are starting to fill back up again, and they're nearly identical maps.
Yep.
It's like how they're killing their own people. It's amazing. Anyhow, Carol, thank you for the call. Dave in Portland. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Great show. Your last caller just sort of put a spin on what I was wanting to say. I agree with her. I think there's an element of that. I agree with Justin Frank who says that there's a lot of just plain psychopathy involved here. I know I have a Republican family in the Midwest that are acting like psychopaths toward me for having my opinions. And it's cancerous. It's growing. And this. Justin Frank has talked about it. It's rooted in suffering. It's rooted in fear. It's rooted in the slow, degrading, GOP-driven poverty is growing. And these are the GOP. And the reason I called was to suggest that, in addition, you had a previous caller earlier. She suggested that it was the reason Republicans want so many people to die of COVID is to get them off of welfare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
Well, that's a possibility, Dave. I mean, these red states are the largest consumers of welfare in the United States. They're the poorest states. So if they can kill off a bunch of those people, then they free up some of their budget that they can use to spiff their buddies, It's
for taxes.
Yeah.
So,
cut taxes.
Add to that what I've called into the show a couple of times about, which is behind the same thing with McConnell last year, blocking all aid to small businesses and the poor. Why? To make them go bankrupt, so they can get those houses, so they can get those small businesses for pennies on the dollar. There are hedge funds bigger than the GOP. They own the GOP. The GOP is owned by.
Oh yeah. So out of a crisis, we make money. I get it, Dave.
Predatory capitalism. It's
disaster capitalism.
Yeah.
It's what Naomi Klein wrote.
I mean, we literally call them vulture funds.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Dave, thank you for that. This conversation is starting to fill out the picture, I think. We'll continue right after this break. Stick around. I'll be back in 1 minute. Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Nate, Sean, I'm hearing an alarm. It's okay. All right, good. You just never know what's going on here. What's that noise? Anyhow, we're back, and David in Minneapolis. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. You know, Dave from Portland just touched upon what I was about to say, and that is listen to the messaging. The messaging is that, you know, if you're young and healthy, you'll be fine. But if you're old or you're sick, you're going to die. And that's who they're targeting. They're targeting Social Security and Medicare and Obamacare.
So, Dave, the previous caller had basically, I think I could boil it down to 2 points. One is, let's kill off the people who are expensive, the low-income people who are on welfare and Social Security recipients. Let's kill them off so we can cut taxes further. And disaster capitalism. If we can put the economy back into another tailspin, there will be more small businesses that will go bankrupt, and then big, giant, monopolistic companies that get billions or hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer relief, they can swoop in and pick up those places of business and those customer bases and start making money off them.
And it goes beyond a single election, because when you kill those people up, those programs lose support.
Right.
And now they got new voters on their sides, prosperous voters on their sides, ready to vote for them in 2028, 2032.
Yeah. I get it. Whatever it is, it's so perfidious. I mean, this is so evil, basically. You know, at CPAC, this guy's saying, they thought that they could get 90% of people vaccinated, but it ain't going to happen. And everybody's applauding. And it's like, well, really? David, thank you. You nailed it. Chuck in Costa Mesa, California. Hey, Chuck, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I retired 2 years ago after a 40-year career as a nurse practitioner and administrator of occupational health programs. I feel so sorry for my healthcare colleagues. I've watched from the cheap seats to this unfolding of the COVID pandemic, and the objection and politically motivated and otherwise objection to vaccines is simply outrageous, and the cost of this objection will further the pandemic, and the actual cost, medical cost, and cost to the healthcare workers is simply outrageous. Mm-hmm. I do think that anyone who is objecting at this point to being vaccinated should consider setting up a prepaid burial program with a smokehouse or burial program included, and forward that on to their next of kin.
Yeah.
It's
they're talking here in Washington State about legalizing mulching human remains. But yeah, Chuck, I get it. I totally get it, and I don't disagree with you. And good on you for being an NP all those years. One of my kids is, and it's an honorable profession. I got to move along, but thank you for the call, Ed in Denver. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Yeah. Hey, I'd like to offer a psychological reason to your list.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Republicans have this deep-seated, irrational fear of what they see as a coming trend towards a socialism. They're longing for the past capitalism that they
But it's not like Marxist socialism. I mean, what people are talking about wanting is Medicare for all and free college. It's what every other developed country in the world has had for decades.
Right. Yeah, I don't say that. No, that's what they see it. They see it as socialism.
Yeah. Well, I think they've been sold a bill of goods.
But I think it's a psychological fear. It's deep-seated, irrational.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Paranoid.
It makes sense. Ed, I want to try and get one more caller in here, but it makes sense. Thank you. Sheila, we have 30 seconds. Sheila, you had a quick question or point?
Yeah, I have a quick point to make. That you're baffled by the Congress people. I'm baffled by the constituents who listen and believe what the Republicans are saying.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's because they live in these little bubbles, these little information bubbles. Sheila, I'm sorry, I thought I had more time than I did, but thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you, and spot on. I salute you. Absolutely. What you said. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there, get active, and get vaccinated if you're not. Tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and people around you. And check out, Joe Biden is just starting his speech here. Check it out.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.